We were taught in Northern Europe that not a lot happened, but these texts must have gone somewhere. Somebody must have recopied them, and that was my starting point for my research. So I chose 3 texts, and then I just followed where they were taken, where they were recopied, and where they were studied. The first major place that they were studied in the 8th and 9th centuries was Baghdad, and from there they were spread out across the vast Muslim empire, and many of them were brought to Cordoba in Al-Andalus, and they were studied and recopied there. I chose those 3 because they were all leaders in their individual fields. Euclid wrote the greatest, the most important mathematical text of antiquity, which was called the Elements, and it's the foundation text for mathematics. He explains, starting right with the very simplest things, and then explains all geometry and number theory. Ptolemy wrote a book called the Almagest, which was a complete survey of astronomical knowledge of that time, which was the 2nd century AD. Around the same time, Galen was writing his many medical texts. I chose a few, the most important ones, the ones that were the basis of the medical curriculum in the Middle Ages, and I followed them on their journey. Well, initially, the caliphs of Baghdad in the 8th and 9th centuries became very interested in ancient scientific knowledge, so they sent out their scholars across the Middle East and Asia Minor and North Africa to find copies of these important texts, and they brought them back to Baghdad and translated them into Arabic, and then used the knowledge they contained and developed it and combined it with theories from other places like India, and also with their own ideas. And then these texts were taken across the Muslim world, and they came to Cordoba, and when the Reconquista began, Toledo was conquered in 1085. Libraries of the Arabs became available to Latin scholars, and that was when the translation into Latin began in earnest. All of the cities which I visit in my book were all important in the preservation of this knowledge. So Baghdad, Cordoba, Toledo, and then Salerno in southern Italy, which was a very important centre of medical study, and it was where texts were brought from North Africa in Arabic, many of which were based on Galen, and they were translated into Latin there. And then, of course, in Sicily, texts were taken from Constantinople in Greek, and they were translated directly into Latin. In all of these cities, there were rulers who had a personal interest in these kind of subjects, and they also needed this kind of knowledge for practical reasons to help them rule and impose taxation and that kind of thing. All of the places were welcoming to people of other cultures, and of course that was crucial for translation to take place, because you need people who can speak different languages, and you also need scholars who are interested and talented intellectually. They were a combination of some of them were the rulers who were personally interested, and then there were also the scholars, merchants who were also scholars, and because of their lifestyle traveling, they had access to texts that other people wouldn't. Translators, and many of them were also scholars, and they of course were extremely important because they were the ones who were able to bring the contents of the text from one culture into another.